When I moved in with my son after a bad fall, I thought I was being welcomed home. The room in the basement, the meal schedules, the house rules. I assumed they were just temporary. But that morning, as I folded laundry in the dim light of the laundry room, Jessica leaned in and whispered, "Don't react. Wait until your son leaves." Her eyes weren't cold. They were terrified. I didn't breathe a word, but in that moment I knew something was deeply wrong in this house. And I wasn't just a guest, I was a pawn. After the fall in her kitchen, nothing more than a slipped heel and a bruised rib, Nancy had sworn she'd be fine. She was always fine. For 35 years, she'd raised her only son, taught second grade, survived a quiet divorce, and paid off her modest home in Ohio. Independence wasn't just a preference, it was how she had survived. So when Kevin called, his voice warm and low like when he was 8 and needed help with homework, she listened. "Mom," he'd said, "you're not getting any younger. You don't have to be alone. We've got plenty of space. Jessica and I talked. Come stay with us. Let us take care of you." That last line made her eyes sting. It had been years since anyone offered her care. She told herself it was temporary just until her side healed. A few weeks, a month at most. She gave away her garden tools, donated her books, packed 3 suitcases, and left behind the only home that had ever been hers. The drive to California was a blur of rented moving vans and silence. When Kevin greeted her at the door of the house, a sleek 2-story in a quiet suburb, he hugged her like he meant it. Jessica smiled too, perfectly polite, lips tight, eyes unreadable. "We've set up the downstairs for you," Kevin said, taking her bag before she could protest. Downstairs meant the basement. The room was clean, functional, a twin bed with a stiff white sheet, a narrow dresser, a folding table as a desk. There was a small window high on the wall, letting in a slice of light from ground level. It reminded her of the classroom supply closet she used to organize once a year. "It's temporary," Kevin said. "We'll figure something out if you're staying longer." Nancy smiled, nodded, tucked her cardigan closer. "Of course, sweetie, this is more than enough." That night she lay awake in the twin bed, her body aching in familiar places. From above, muffled footsteps creaked across hardwood. Laughter. The clang of dishes. A child's giggle. Her grandson, Owen. She smiled. Then came a sound. Click. She sat up. It wasn't loud, but unmistakable. The turn of a lock. The door at the top of the stairs. Someone had locked it from the other side. She waited. 10 minutes, 20. No voices, no returning footsteps. No one came back down. She pressed her ear to the door, listened. Silence. The next morning, the lock was gone. Or rather, it had never existed. Kevin met her in the kitchen with a grin and a fresh mug of coffee. Jessica handed her a bowl of oatmeal and asked about her sleep. Nancy didn't mention it, didn't ask. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe it was some auto-lock mechanism. She didn't want to be the paranoid old woman on her first morning in a new home. The days that followed felt strange in small ways. The family's schedule was precise. Breakfast done by 7:30, kitchen cleaned by 8:00, no noise during Owen's nap at 1:00, dinner promptly at 6 ECU. Nancy tried her best to stay out of the way. Jessica remained cordial. But there was a chill behind her words, like every sentence was measured. She didn't complain when Nancy offered to help with dishes, but she'd always rewash them. When Nancy folded the laundry, Jessica unfolded it and redid it, claiming she had a system. Kevin, for his part, was sweet when he was home, but that was rare. Meetings, late nights, travel. He kissed Nancy's cheek and promised, "We'll catch up this weekend." Then the weekend passed in a blur of Owen's soccer games and Jessica's errands. One evening, Nancy offered to cook her famous beef stew. Jessica paused, a hand on the fridge door. "Oh, Kevin doesn't really do red meat anymore, and Owen has allergies. Maybe next time." Nancy nodded, swallowed the lump in her throat, and made herself toast in the microwave. That night, she tried not to hear the lock click again, but she did, twice. She began to pay attention. Every night, once the last light upstairs turned off, the lock clicked. Every morning, it was unlocked before she woke. She told herself it was safety. Maybe Owen could fall down the stairs. Maybe it was nothing. But in her bones, she knew it wasn't nothing. Still, she said nothing. Instead, she trimmed the edges of her presence like a dying vine. She moved quietly, kept the basement door half shut, folded laundry, cleaned her own dishes, played soft jazz in her earbuds rather than aloud. She missed her books, her garden, the smell of her own kitchen. She missed having a light switch that turned on a lamp she picked, in a room she painted, in a house she owned. But when Kevin smiled at her on Sunday morning and said, "How's it going down there, Mom?" she smiled back, "It's going just fine, honey." Because what else could she say? Nancy had never thought of herself as fragile, but something about this house made her feel paper thin. She moved quietly, cautiously. She wasn't told what to do, not directly, but the rules were everywhere. There was no need to say, "Don't touch the stove after 6 p.m. It was implied when Jessica rearranged the kitchen every evening and left the stovetop spotless, a silent sign that dinner was done and the kitchen closed. There was no formal rule about the washing machine either. But the one time Nancy ran a small load of towels at 10 a.m., Jessica came downstairs with a tight smile. "Oh, just a heads up," she said. "The washer makes a lot of noise during Owen's schoolwork time." Nancy apologized and never did it again. The same thing happened with the living room. When guests came over, friends from Jessica's yoga class, couples from Owen's school, Nancy would retreat to the basement before anyone asked. She wasn't told to, but no one invited her to stay either. The unspoken expectations piled up like dust behind furniture, always present, never acknowledged. Kevin remained the soft cushion between it all. He texted her memes, brought her flowers on Sunday. "I know it's an adjustment," he'd say, "but we're glad you're here." Nancy smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her grandson, Owen, was her only real anchor. He'd sneak downstairs with Lego pieces or ask her to read to him. She cherished those moments, brief, unsupervised, unscripted. But even those began to shrink. Jessica started setting tighter schedules, claimed Owen needed routine. So Nancy adjusted again. That was her pattern. Bend, not break. Then came the laundry. It was a small thing. Folding clothes in the basement laundry room was the one task that gave Nancy purpose, something familiar to fill the silence. That afternoon, the air smelled like lavender detergent and warm cotton. She had just folded the last towel when footsteps approached from behind. Jessica. Nancy didn't turn around. She felt her immediately, the hush in the air, the weight of unspoken words. Then Jessica leaned close. Her voice was low, sharp but controlled. "Don't react. Wait until your son leaves." Nancy froze. She could feel Jessica's breath near her ear, but the woman didn't touch her. There was no warning, no context, no explanation. Then Jessica stepped back as if nothing had been said and walked away. Nancy stood there, towel still in her hands, her pulse thudding in her ears. What had she meant? Was this a threat, a warning, a test? Her first instinct was fear. Was she being kicked out? Had Kevin changed his mind? Had Jessica finally decided that Nancy had overstayed her welcome? She folded the towel with shaking hands and placed it on top of the basket, as neatly as ever. Then she sat on the edge of the washing machine, trying to steady her breath. 1,000 questions pulsed through her mind. She replayed the words, "Don't react." That alone made her stomach twist. It meant whatever Jessica had to say or reveal wasn't safe to share openly. And the second part, "Wait until your son leaves," added another layer of dread. Jessica wasn't emotional when she spoke. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. It was scared. And that, perhaps, was the most unsettling part. That night, Nancy watched Kevin from across the dinner table. He was laughing with Owen, asking about school, sipping from his wine glass. There was nothing unusual in his behavior. No signs of tension, no betrayal, no darkness. She forced herself to eat. The roast was perfectly seasoned. Jessica smiled, complimented Nancy's cardigan, and cleared the dishes without fuss. Like nothing had happened. Nancy said nothing. She waited, like she was told. When Kevin left for work the next morning, Nancy stood by the window and watched his car disappear down the street. Her palms were cold, her shoulders tense. She expected Jessica to come down right away to finish whatever she had started, but nothing happened. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. Nancy busied herself with small tasks, wiping down the stairs, reorganizing the sock drawer, watering the wilted pothos plant by the stairs. Still nothing. It wasn't until the 3rd day, another whisper, another moment alone, that Jessica returned. But she said nothing more. Just handed Nancy a cup of tea, met her eyes for a long second, and left. Whatever was coming wasn't over. It was only beginning. Kevin had always been her soft spot. Even as a teenager with the usual stubborn streak, he never slammed doors or cursed. When his father left, Kevin was the one who brought Nancy tissues and made her scrambled eggs the next morning. As an adult, he'd flown back home when she had the flu, bought her a Kindle when she stopped going to the library, and sent her texts every Sunday, no matter what. So when he began to change, it wasn't all at once. It was gradual, like the quiet decay of paint on a wall you don't realize is peeling until the whole strip comes loose. The first sign was tone. "Mom, you really don't have to do the dishes," he said one night, his voice unusually clipped. "Jessica has a system." She had only meant to help. Jessica had cooked dinner. Nancy thought the least she could do was tidy up, but she nodded and backed away. Then came the suggestions. Suggestions wrapped in concern. "There's this senior center nearby," Kevin mentioned over breakfast. "Great programs, safe, clean. I drove past it on the way home. Just thought we could take a tour sometime." Nancy blinked. "You mean, like assisted living?" No, he said too quickly. "Just options, you know. You're not getting any younger. Places like that have trained staff, 24/7 care, community, things we can't always offer." Jessica didn't say anything. She just sipped her coffee and avoided Nancy's eyes. That night, Nancy lay awake longer than usual. She wasn't sick. She wasn't helpless. Was she a burden? She started noticing more things. The way Kevin didn't linger in conversations like he used to. The way his compliments felt rehearsed. The way he gently corrected her when she tried to discipline Owen for leaving toys on the stairs. "Mom, we don't really raise our voice here," he'd said. "We try redirection instead." It wasn't harsh. It wasn't cruel. But it stung. And through it all, Jessica said nothing more. No new whispers. No explanations. Nancy found herself drifting. Then came the folder. It was a Tuesday. Kevin had gone to work, Jessica had taken Owen to the park, and Nancy was dusting the bookshelf in Kevin's home office. She didn't mean to snoop, just wanted to wipe the pollen off the windowsill. The bottom drawer was slightly ajar. Inside was a red accordion folder labeled Policy Docs. She hesitated, then opened it. What she saw took her breath. There, neatly stacked among other papers, was a life insurance policy with her name in bold across the top. Insured Nancy H. Monroe. Beneficiary Kevin Monroe. Policy amount $500,000. Status active. Nancy's hands trembled as she flipped to the signature page. Her signature stared back at her. Only, it wasn't hers. It looked like hers. Same slant, same loops, but it wasn't. She had never signed this, never approved this, never even heard of it. Her stomach twisted. She checked the date. It had been activated 3 months ago, 2 weeks after she'd moved in. She sat down on the edge of the desk, clutching the folder to her chest. Her throat tightened. Her eyes burned. Had Kevin forged her signature? Was it Jessica? Was this what she had meant that day in the laundry room? Nancy stood up, shut the drawer, replaced everything exactly as it was. She walked back downstairs and sat on her bed, trying to slow her breathing. Was she being paranoid? She thought of the way Kevin had brought up assisted living, the way the basement door locked every night, the subtle erasure of her presence in this house. And now, this. She reached for her phone and opened the Notes app. For the first time since moving in, she began to document everything: dates, times, phrases, every interaction that had made her pause, every locked door, every clipped comment. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't old age or nerves. Something was happening, and now, finally, she had proof. But what she didn't yet know, what still lay ahead, was that this was only one piece of a much darker puzzle. Jessica didn't say anything for 3 more days. Nancy watched her closely, quietly, trying not to draw attention. Her movements remained the same, precise, methodical, distant. But something in her eyes had shifted. She wasn't cold anymore. She looked tired, like someone holding too many secrets under too thin a veil. It happened in the kitchen. Kevin had just left for work. Owen was at school. Jessica was stacking dishes into the dishwasher, her back to Nancy, when she said it. "You found the policy, didn't you?" Nancy froze. The question wasn't accusatory. It was soft, like it had been sitting on Jessica's tongue for days, waiting for the right moment to land. Nancy began, but Jessica cut her off. "I didn't sign it either. I didn't know about it until last week. The signature on that form? Kevin forged it. Both of ours." Nancy sat down slowly at the table, her hands gripping the edge. Jessica finally turned around. "I've been quiet because I didn't want to tip him off. He checks the cameras." "Cameras?" Nancy whispered. Jessica nodded. "Only upstairs. But he monitors movement, tracks phone calls, our devices, everything." The room shrank around them. Jessica sat across from her, lowered her voice further. "I hired someone," she said, "a private investigator, quiet, discreet. I needed to know how far this went. The insurance policy was just the start." Nancy's throat was dry. "Why didn't you just tell me?" Jessica looked away. "Because I didn't trust you either. I thought you were helping him, that you came here to take over, that he was using you to control me." Nancy let out a stunned breath. "What?" Jessica's voice cracked. "He's not who he used to be. He started locking me out of our accounts. Then came the mood swings, the gaslighting, the rules about Owen. Then that policy showed up in the mail, addressed to him, but with your name and mine. I knew something was wrong. That's why I whispered to you." Nancy sat in silence, piecing everything together. Jessica wasn't the cold one. She was trapped too. The enemy she thought she had in this house wasn't Jessica. It was Kevin. Nancy wanted to scream, to cry, to run. But more than that, she wanted to know what Jessica was planning. "What now?" she asked. Jessica pulled a manila envelope from her tote bag and slid it across the table. Inside were photocopies, emails, transaction records, screenshots, insurance documents with timestamps and routing info, even a printout from a GPS tracking app Kevin had apparently installed on Jessica's phone. Nancy's stomach turned. "He's building a case," Jessica said, "trying to make me look unstable. If I disappear, if something happens to me or to you, he wants it to look like it was just stress." Nancy closed the envelope. Her hands shook. "Why are you showing me this now?" Jessica hesitated. Then she looked Nancy directly in the eye. "Because I need your help." Nancy blinked. "I'm filing for divorce," Jessica said. "But Kevin won't let Owen go easily. If he wins full custody, I'll lose him. And I can't prove half of this without someone else in the house backing me up." "So you want me to testify?" Nancy asked. Jessica shook her head. "Not yet. I need time and leverage." She paused, then added, "That life insurance policy, it's leverage. And right now, you're the only person who can confirm it's a forgery." Nancy felt her stomach twist. The lines were blurring too fast. "Are you trying to protect me?" she asked slowly. "Or use me?" Jessica looked down. "Both." It was the only honest thing anyone had said to her since she moved in. Nancy stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the cul-de-sac. The sun was blinding, the street quiet. Birds chirped like the world wasn't shifting under her feet. She didn't know who to trust. She didn't even know if she should trust herself. But she knew one thing now for certain. She was in the middle of something far bigger than just bad manners and passive-aggressive dinner rules. This wasn't a family feud. It was a chess game. And she had just become the most valuable piece on the board. Nancy hadn't spoken to David Ross in over a decade. He'd handled the estate after her husband passed, an efficient man with square glasses and a voice like gravel. She still remembered the way he explained every clause in plain English, made her feel seen when everyone else was just tossing papers in front of her to sign. She wasn't even sure he was still practicing, but when she called his number from her old contacts, he answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, a note of polite surprise. "Been a while." "I need to talk," she said, "in person." David cleared his schedule and told her to come by the next afternoon. She made an excuse about meeting an old friend, ignored Kevin's half-interested, "have fun," and took the bus across town. His office hadn't changed. Same leather chairs, same heavy oak desk. The moment she sat down, the weight in her chest cracked open. "David," she said, voice trembling, "I need to know who owns this house." David blinked. "Excuse me?" "The house. Kevin's. I mean, the one I'm living in. He said it's his, but I remember something different when Bill died. Can you check?" He gave her a long look, then nodded. 10 minutes and a few database searches later, he looked up. "The deed was transferred to Kevin's name for a bank loan," he said, "but..." He turned the monitor so she could see. "The title remains in your name. You're the legal owner. It was never finalized, just used as collateral." Nancy stared at the screen. It was her house, the same one Kevin had begged her to move into, the one with the locked basement door and the unspoken rules, the house where she felt like an intruder. She swallowed hard. "Can I change ownership?" David tilted his head. "As long as you're still of sound mind and not under coercion, yes." She didn't hesitate. "I want to transfer it to my niece, Claire. She lives in Oregon." He raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" "I'm done being someone's pawn," she said. So the paperwork took 3 days. During that time, Nancy kept her routine the same. She folded laundry, smiled at Owen, pretended not to notice Kevin's sudden uptick in charm. More jokes, longer hugs. "Let's get lunch soon, Mom." She didn't tell Jessica either. She needed this to be hers. On the morning the notice was scheduled to arrive, Kevin and Jessica were already at each other's throats. Nancy heard it from the basement, muffled yelling, Owen crying upstairs, words like custody, evidence, and "you lied to me" bouncing off the walls. She didn't go up. She waited. At 9:17 a.m., the doorbell rang. Nancy was in the kitchen when the courier handed Kevin the envelope, thick, official-looking, with her name embossed on the back. Kevin opened it right there, fingers trembling, his face drained of color. Jessica paused mid-sentence. "What is it?" He didn't answer. Jessica snatched the papers from his hand. Her eyes scanned the page, then widened. "This is an eviction notice," she said, stunned. "From your mother." Kevin turned to Nancy, fury replacing confusion. "What the hell is this?" Nancy stepped forward, calm, composed. She wore her soft lavender sweater, the one Kevin had gifted her years ago, and looked directly at him. "This house belongs to me," she said, "legally, always has." Kevin's mouth opened, but she kept going. "I transferred ownership. Claire owns it now, and she's renting it to me, which means you, both of you, are tenants without a lease." Jessica looked between them, speechless. Nancy took a deep breath. "You wanted to talk about who's in the way, who's temporary, who's a burden. Well," she held up the notice. "Turns out it's not me." Kevin stepped toward her, his voice low and trembling. "You don't know what you're doing." "Yes," she said, "I do. For the first time in years." Jessica looked like she might collapse. She sat down hard on the couch, eyes wide. "I'll give you 30 days, Nancy said, and I'll make sure Owen has a soft landing. But this ends now." No one spoke. Nancy walked out of the room, heart pounding, hands steady. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Because for the first time since she arrived, Nancy wasn't surviving. She was winning. The 30 days passed like the final tick of a long, bitter clock. Kevin didn't speak to her once during that time. He moved around the house like a ghost, no longer stomping or barking orders, just there, fading. He left in the early mornings, returned late, and avoided eye contact. Once, Nancy heard him crying through the bathroom door, but she didn't knock. She wasn't sure she would have anything to say if she did. Jessica, for her part, moved quickly. She met with her attorney, filed for divorce, and submitted all the evidence she'd collected: the GPS tracker, the financial inconsistencies, the insurance forgery. Nancy offered her written statement about the fake policy and Kevin's escalating behavior. Jessica didn't thank her, but she nodded. That was enough. On the final day, Nancy stood by the front steps with Owen, watching a moving van pull away. Jessica had secured temporary custody and a small apartment 2 towns over. Owen hugged Nancy tightly, promising to visit. Jessica didn't hug her, but she looked back once before driving away. Kevin didn't say goodbye. 2 weeks later, federal investigators arrived at the house with questions. Nancy answered calmly, offering documents and timelines. She didn't gloat. She didn't rage. She just told the truth. By the end of the summer, Kevin was under official investigation for insurance fraud and identity falsification. He hadn't been arrested, not yet, but the weight of it pressed on him visibly. He'd lost his job, his reputation, his family. The house, the one that had once locked her in at night, that whispered of exile with every silent meal, was now quiet, still, free. Claire, her niece, offered to keep the title under her name for protection, but Nancy signed a rental agreement anyway. She paid a modest amount each month, more as principle than necessity. She wanted the paper trail, the proof, and she wanted to feel the dignity of choice. In the mornings, she opened all the windows. She planted rosemary by the back fence and hung wind chimes on the patio. She moved the washer and dryer upstairs and repainted the basement a warm cream. The lock on the basement door? Gone. Her life returned in small, precious pieces. A stack of books from the library, a bird feeder outside the kitchen window, Owen visiting on weekends, helping her plant tomatoes and asking for stories about when Dad was little. Nancy didn't talk about Kevin much, not with bitterness, not with anger. She let Owen build his own image of his father, untainted. She focused on her garden, her writing, the peace. One afternoon, she sat by the bay window with a cup of tea and opened her laptop. She'd been drafting something for weeks, a collection of reflections, not quite a memoir, not quite advice, just moments, moments where she broke, moments where she bent, moments where she reclaimed space in silence. She titled the document, "The Last Door Unlocked." The last page was a letter, not to Kevin, not to Jessica, not even to Owen. It was to herself. Dear Nancy, you were never weak. You were waiting, listening, choosing when to speak, when to act, when to leave the door closed, and when to open it yourself. They mistook your quiet for surrender. They confused your stillness with submission, but you knew. You always knew. Love, even from a child, is not ownership. Kindness is not debt. Laughter is not immunity. And loyalty, when demanded, ceases to be love at all. Filial piety is a gift, not a tool, not a chain, not a weapon, just a gift. And you are no one's burden. You are your own beginning. She saved the file and leaned back. The wind moved through the rosemary. The chimes sang softly. Somewhere in the house, an old jazz record played, scratching gently like memory. Nancy closed her eyes, not to forget, but to remember, on her own terms.